The sound was faint. So faint, in fact, that most people would have passed it off as nothing more than the wind whispering through the trees. But to Zane Porter, the vibrations were unmistakable. He stood on the edge of the barren wasteland, his boots kicking up dust, eyes closed, listening. The ground beneath him hummed with a delicate rhythm. To anyone else, it was just cracked earth and twisted metal, a relic of industrial greed. But to Zane, it was a symphony. The faintest whispers of life clung to this place. The field had been deserted for years, and the silence here was deep, unnatural. Yet to Zane's heightened senses, it was anything but still. He could feel the pulse of every blade of grass that might have grown, every rusted piece of metal buried beneath the earth. The sound of life, no matter how minuscule, reverberated through his fingertips. His ability was both a blessing and a curse. Zane had long since stopped trying to explain it to people who'd look at him like he was a lunatic. He couldn't tell his colleagues that he could feel plant roots grow, or that the air hummed with the faintest vibrations of photosynthesis. It didn't help that most of his friends thought he was just a little eccentric. Zane looked down at the cracked, polluted soil beneath his hands. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, as if he were coaxing a child to get out of bed. "Just a little more, I know you've got it in you." He stretched his fingers wide, feeling the air dance around him as though it were alive. With his eyes still shut, he focused on the pulse in the earth. The plants wanted to grow again. He could feel it. It was there, deep beneath the grime, waiting for just a nudge. Zane's gift, this strange sensitivity, allowed him to do what no one else could. He could repair what others deemed beyond hope. He'd revived dead plots of land before. He'd seen fields turn from ash to green in a matter of months. But this land? This wasteland? Zane smirked to himself. He'd make it work. He always did. He pressed his palm to the ground, listening, waiting for the pulse to respond. Then there it was. A vibration. A slight shudder, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. But Zane felt it as clearly as he felt his own heartbeat. He grinned, a spark of excitement lighting up his eyes. It was working. It was really working. "See," he whispered, a gleam of pride in his voice. "Told you." Then the ground shifted. Zane's grin faltered as the vibration intensified. The earth beneath his palm buzzed with an energy that felt too strong. For a moment, he thought maybe the wind was just stirring things up, but this was no breeze. No. This was something else. The hum wasn't the rhythm of life, it was a pulse. A pulse that was too active. He jumped back, eyes snapping open, his pulse quickening in response to the rising energy beneath him. Something was wrong. The ground continued to vibrate, the hum echoing in his bones, and then, shit. Zane stumbled back, nearly tripping over a pile of debris. What the hell was going on? For a second, it seemed like the earth itself had come alive. He had to think fast. This was too much. His ability had never triggered such a strong reaction before. Was it some kind of plant he hadn't encountered? Or, before he could finish that thought, the soil in front of him shifted. A crack appeared in the earth, a deep fissure forming like an open wound. The soil buckled and trembled, sending a wave of ripples across the ground. Zane backed up, instinctively putting distance between himself and whatever was rising from beneath the surface. Then, it happened. From the crack in the earth emerged a mass of roots, dense, gnarled, and pulsing with strange bioluminescence. It moved as though it were a living creature, stretching, pushing up through the dirt with an unnatural force. The roots seemed to weave in on themselves, converging to form something larger. A creature? An entity? Zane's mind raced as he watched, transfixed by the sight that it wasn't like anything he'd seen before. The roots were almost too perfect, winding in ways that didn't make sense. They bent and twisted like they were alive in a way that defied reason. The creature, or whatever it was, seemed to have no clear form, just shifting roots and tendrils that undulated through the air, leaving glowing trails in their wake. Zane took a step back, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was witnessing. This wasn't supposed to happen. His vibrations weren't supposed to summon this. Before he could react further, the creature, if that's what it was, stopped. It hovered there in the soil, its tendrils writhing, and then, for the briefest moment, it stilled. A pulse shot through the air. Zane felt it. It wasn't physical, but it was unmistakable. The vibration, it was calling to him. Zane hesitated. This thing was not something that could be dealt with like a regular project. It wasn't a plant, and it wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything he had the training to understand, and yet, it was responding to him. He took a slow step forward, almost on instinct. "Hello?" he called out cautiously. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to the creature or just trying to convince himself that this was real. The vibration in the air intensified. The roots shuddered, and then a soft hum rose from the ground, reverberating in Zane's chest. It was almost like a voice, low and resonant, but too abstract to translate into words. For a moment, Zane wondered if he was losing his mind. He had always had a close connection to nature, but this felt like something beyond nature. Something older. Something ancient. The hum changed, becoming louder, more insistent. And then, like a sharp gust of wind, the energy reversed, pulling back into the earth, leaving Zane standing in the now silent field, heart pounding in his chest. "What the hell?" he murmured to himself. As he stood there, shaking off the surreal feeling, his mind raced. There was no way he could just walk away from this. No way he could ignore what he had just encountered. This thing, whatever it was, had been waiting. He looked down at the ground, taking a deep breath to calm himself. He could still feel the vibrations. They were quieter now, but they were still there, calling to him. "Well," he said to the empty field, cracking a small grin, "guess I've got my work cut out for me." The field was still. The faint hum of the earth seemed to have faded, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Zane couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface, watching him. The ground, now undisturbed, gave no hint of the creature that had just emerged from it. He knelt down, his hand hovering over the cracked earth where the fissure had opened. The faintest tremor lingered in the air, almost like an aftershock. His pulse raced, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, rationally. He had to think, was this real? It had to be. The vibrations were unmistakable. He felt it in his bones, in the way his fingers had tingled when they touched the ground. This wasn't a trick of his senses. Whatever it was alive. Zane rose to his feet and surveyed the land again, his gaze narrowing. The patch of earth before him was still scorched and barren, but there was something in the air now. A sense of anticipation. A feeling that something was about to change. He couldn't explain it, but it was there, beneath the dust and decay. Turning his attention back to the small fissure, he crouched down again. The crack was almost imperceptible now, the earth having settled back into its former state. But there was something about the soil that still felt different. He reached out with his senses, trying to detect any remnants of the pulse he had felt earlier. His fingertips brushed the dirt, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then there it was. The faintest vibration. Zane's breath hitched. He closed his eyes and focused on it, tracing the sensation with his mind. It was alive, but it wasn't just the soil or the plants. The pulse was coming from something deeper. Something that had been disturbed. Before he could think too much about it, the ground shifted again. This time, the movement was more deliberate, more controlled. The roots beneath the earth stirred, like fingers curling around a hidden object. Slowly, steadily, the ground began to form into shapes. Zane watched in stunned silence as the soil and the plants twisted, almost as if they were being pulled together by invisible strings. The ground didn't crack this time. It undulated, shifting like a living organism, and then it appeared. At first, it was just a mass of roots gnarled and tangled, shimmering with an eerie, bioluminescent glow. But as the pulse deepened, the mass began to take on form. A shape slender, almost ethereal, but clearly not of this world. Tendrils rose from the ground, coiling and writhing like serpents in a slow dance. They were alive, but not in a way Zane had ever seen before. These weren't mere plants. They were something more. Something ancient. The creature's form shifted again, more defined now, a body that resembled something between a plant and an animal, with branches that seemed to pulse with energy. Zane's heart pounded in his chest. The air around him felt charged, as though he were standing at the epicenter of some great force. He could feel the vibrations intensifying, thrumming in his bones, his blood. The creature's glowing tendrils reached out, brushing against the earth, weaving through the soil like they were communicating with it. Zane stood frozen, unsure whether to step forward or run. It wasn't attacking, but there was an undeniable presence about it. A deep, ancient intelligence, and then it moved. Not aggressively, but deliberately, slowly, like it was testing the air around it. The roots coiled together, forming a large central mass, a kind of floating organism that seemed to breathe with the earth. The humming sound began again, deep and resonant, but now, it was unmistakably a form of communication. Zane could feel it. The vibrations were different, more complex than before. It was speaking, in a language that wasn't vocal but was still deeply felt, almost like a sensation that reverberated in the air. He didn't know how, but he could sense it. This thing was aware of him. A presence that had been waiting beneath the earth for who knows how long, and now, it was reaching out. To him, his mind raced. What the hell was he supposed to do with this? He wasn't a scientist specializing in ancient plant life or alien ecosystems. He was a guy who could sense plant growth. That was it. But somehow, everything around him, the very land itself, seemed to be responding to him. Okay, Zane muttered under his breath, as though trying to convince himself. This isn't exactly how I imagined my day going, but all right. Let's see where this goes. The creature, or whatever it was, continued to hum, the vibrations growing stronger, as if urging him closer. Zane's curiosity got the better of him. He moved forward, slowly, cautiously, as if stepping into the unknown. The air around him buzzed with energy, and the ground seemed to pulse underfoot. As he stepped closer to the center of the mass, the creature's tendrils unfurled, moving toward him like they were sensing his approach. He held his ground. The last thing he needed was to provoke whatever this thing was. Then, without warning, one of the tendrils shot out toward him. Zane's heart skipped a beat, but before he could react, it stopped just inches from his face. He stared at it, his breath held. The tendril hovered in the air, its glowing tip glowing brighter, almost like it was trying to understand him. Or see him. It felt intelligent. Alive. And it was reaching for him, pulling at him in ways he couldn't explain. Zane took a step back, his instinct to retreat rising in his chest. But the moment his foot left the ground, the creature's tendrils recoiled. It wasn't hostile, but it was curious. Hungry, maybe. It wasn't just reaching out to him. It was reaching for something more. He swallowed hard. Okay, he said to himself, his voice shaking slightly. You've got this. Just, don't screw it up. The tendrils didn't attack. Instead, they pulled back into the earth, and for a moment, the ground grew still again, the vibrations waning. Zane, still on edge, remained where he was, trying to process everything that had just happened. Was it a warning? A test? The silence stretched on, but the odd sensation in the air didn't fade. It was as though the creature was waiting. Zane had no idea what to do next. He wasn't a naturalist, a biologist, or an environmental specialist. He was just a guy who could feel the land. And right now, he had no idea if he was about to awaken something that had been slumbering for centuries or destroy everything in the process. His fingers twitched at his side. All right, he said again, louder this time. Let's try this. He closed his eyes and, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, reached out with his senses. At first, the pulse was faint, like it had been before. But as he focused, it grew stronger. The vibrations came alive in his hands, swirling around him, responding to his will. The ground hummed in a way that felt cooperative. The creature below was still there, waiting, but now it felt like Zane could influence it. He could help it. Or so he thought. The hum grew more intense, and that's when it hit him. Something had changed. The pulse beneath him wasn't just growing stronger, it was spreading. The energy was seeping out, like roots stretching deep into the earth. It wasn't just the land in front of him anymore. It was everything around him, the entire field, the forest in the distance. The land had been waiting for something to stir it. And now, it was waking up. Zane took a step back, the ground beneath his feet quivering with power. His heart raced. The creature was feeding, but it wasn't just feeding on the vibrations of life, it was feeding on everything. It was growing faster, pulling energy from the soil, the plants, the air. It wasn't just restoring the land. It was transforming it. A slow dread began to sink in. He had no idea what he had unleashed, and then, through the deepening hum, he heard something else. A faint, whispering voice. It wasn't from the creature. It wasn't from the land. It was from the people in the nearby town. The town that had been quietly thriving, unaware of the disruption just outside their borders. The land was waking up. And it wasn't going to stop. The hum grew louder. Zane stood in the middle of the barren field, surrounded by an unnatural silence that was quickly being replaced by an all-encompassing sound. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a deep, resonating vibration that shook the earth beneath his feet. He could feel it in his chest, vibrating through his ribcage, through his bones. The air was thick with it, charged, as though the very atmosphere itself was alive and breathing, pulsing with energy. The creature, if it could even be called that, was feeding. Not just on the soil, but on everything. The vibrations were spreading across the land like a ripple in a pond, growing wider, deeper. The land was waking, and it wasn't just the patch of earth in front of him. It was everything. The trees. The forest in the distance. The water in the nearby river. The wind. All of it was now part of something greater, something alive in a way that Zane had never thought possible. He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his ears. The ground was shaking, the earth trembling in response to the creature's awakening. Zane's mind raced, but he couldn't stop himself from stepping forward. It was like he was tethered to the land, to the vibrations beneath his feet. The thing he had awakened was calling to him, urging him to listen. The tendrils of the creature, still deep beneath the earth, had begun to push outward. They weren't just roots anymore. They were tendrils, alive and writhing, glowing with a soft, eerie light. They were pulling from the very essence of the land, weaving their way through the soil, stretching toward the town in the distance. Zane's breath caught in his throat. The tendrils weren't just feeding on the earth. They were moving. They were pushing their way toward the town, toward civilization. The vibrations were growing stronger, faster, and now, they weren't just a force of nature, they were a warning. The creature was spreading, and it was drawing everything in its wake. Panic surged through Zane. He couldn't let it spread like this. If it reached the town, if it reached people, he didn't know what would happen. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't ready for this. His gift had always been about healing, about restoration. It had never been about control. But now, he had no choice. He had to stop it. Zane stumbled backward, eyes wide as the ground beneath him continued to shake. The tendrils seemed to respond to his fear, writhing faster, pulling deeper. He could feel the pulse of energy growing more intense, more demanding, and it was coming from every direction. The land was no longer just alive, it was aware. He turned and ran, his feet pounding the ground, his mind a whirl of frantic thoughts. The town was only a few miles away. He had to stop the creature before it reached the outskirts, before it reached the people who had no idea what was happening. He could hear the hum in the air, the vibrations growing stronger with every step, a constant, pulsating reminder of the power he had awakened. As he ran, the vibrations began to reach the edges of the field. The air itself seemed to ripple, distorting with the strange energy. Zane's chest tightened. He could hear voices now, distant but clear, rising from the town. The people were starting to feel it too. The air was thick with the hum of the creature's awakening, and it was reaching them. He pushed harder, faster, his legs burning as he crossed the line between the wild land and the cultivated fields. The ground beneath him was trembling more violently now, and he could feel the vibrations echoing up through his feet, up his spine, until they reached the very top of his skull. The pulse was growing, an insistent force that was beyond anything he had ever felt. It was as if the entire world was vibrating in response to the creature's hunger. The town was in sight now, a sprawling collection of houses and streets, smoke curling from chimneys. It was peaceful, unaware. People were going about their day, walking the streets, living their lives. They had no idea that a force far beyond their comprehension was bearing down on them. Zane's heart hammered in his chest. He had to stop this. He had to fix what he had started, but as he got closer to the town, the vibrations became intolerable. The hum in the air felt like a physical presence, pressing against him, pushing him backward. He stumbled, the ground beneath him trembling violently now. The vibration was everywhere, through the streets, through the buildings, through the very air. It was alive. Zane felt it before he saw it. The creature had reached the town, the earth shifted violently beneath him, and then just as he turned to look, the ground exploded. A massive, undulating mass of roots and tendrils burst forth from the ground in the center of the town. The force of the eruption sent debris flying in all directions, shattering windows, knocking over streetlights. The ground buckled, and trees, not trees, branches like twisted arms rose from the earth, reaching for the sky. The creature had arrived. People screamed in terror, running in every direction, but the roots, those strange, glowing tendrils, seemed to move with purpose. They coiled and reached, not just for the people, but for the very structures around them. Buildings began to shift, their foundations sinking into the earth, being overtaken by the creature's unrelenting hunger. The streets buckled and cracked as the roots pushed further and further, consuming everything in their path. Zane watched in horror as the town began to crumble. He had made this. He had awakened something that was too powerful to control. The vibrations had been his doing. The pulse had come from him, from his connection to the earth. And now the earth itself was fighting back, consuming everything in its wake. Desperation clawed at him. He couldn't just stand here and watch. He had to fix it. He had to stop it before it was too late. He closed his eyes, feeling the vibrations, trying to find a way to push back. His mind raced. There had to be a way to stop this. He had felt the earth, the pulse, the rhythm. He had awakened it, but surely he could reverse it. The creature, for its part, seemed to pause, as if sensing his presence. The tendrils reached out, slowly, deliberately, almost like they were waiting for him to make a move. Zane's heart raced. The creature was waiting for him. It was waiting for him to decide whether to let it consume everything, or to stop it. Zane's hands trembled as he raised them, palms open, toward the sky. He could feel the vibrations pulsing through his fingertips, through his chest. This was it. This was the moment. The moment when everything would either be destroyed or restored. He reached out with his mind, pulling the vibrations toward him, manipulating them, trying to reassert control. The energy surged beneath his fingers, and for a moment, it felt like he could reach it, touch it, pull it all back. The vibrations began to settle, but then just as quickly the creature's pulse grew stronger. The earth shuddered, the energy pushed back against him. Zane gritted his teeth. He couldn't give up. He couldn't let the earth win. His mind focused. He pushed harder, concentrating with everything he had. The vibrations trembled under his control, a slow, delicate dance. He could feel it now. The pulse was fading. The creature's tendrils slowed, the glow dimming, the roots retracting, the ground stilled, the vibrations stopped. Zane stood there, breathing heavily, sweat trickling down his face. The creature, whatever it had been, receded back into the earth. The town, what was left of it, was eerily quiet. The destruction was still there, the scars of the creature's passage, but the pulse was gone. The earth had settled. Zane collapsed to his knees, his mind spinning. He had done it. He had stopped it. But at what cost? The land was scarred. The people were terrified. And the creature, it wasn't gone. It was still down there, waiting. Zane looked down at his hands, shaking, and whispered, "What have I done?"